Oh, well, I've been 3D printing for a number of years now, and I'm still constantly blown away by all the really incredible things that I can 3D print. And one of the first things that I made was this Star Wars Lithophane that I still keep out and show to everybody. It stays in my living room, and fortunately my wife doesn't mind that. She likes Star Wars too, as you can see by this awesome folded page book she and my kids made for me. But truthfully, this print has always really intrigued me because I've never actually looked into how this actually works. You know, what can I do with this beyond that? And why did Han say, "I know"?
I love you.
I know.
So I finally got around to doing a deep dive into lithophanes and thought I'd share some of this information with you. First up, what exactly is a lithophane? Well, for a proper definition, the only true source of information online, Wikipedia.
This is a joke, right?
Well, they say that the process was invented in France in the 1820s, and a lithophane is a thin plaque of translucent material, normally porcelain, which has been molded to varying thickness, such that when lit from behind in different thicknesses, it'll show as different shades, forming an image. And only when lit from behind does the image display properly. So, porcelain. Can we 3D print with porcelain? Probably not. Getting started, I found that there are some programs out there that we can all buy, but I really did want to see what I could find without spending any money. Also, I know that Cura has some lithophane functionality, but when I tried it a while back, well, my results were less than amazing. It's also possible that other slicers have this type of functionality as well. I did also look on Creality's website. They have a page that is actually also less than amazing. If you're wanting to really get into the minutiae of lithophanes, there's even a way to get Photoshop to make them using Photoshop actions. And if you're curious about these things, I'll have links to all this in the description. I did some research and I came up with what I think are the 3 top websites out there for creating lithophanes that are completely free, except for maybe a login to the website. Considering the amount of information each one of them provides, well, I'll just say right up front, you can't really go wrong with any of the 3. But hey, why not find the one that I really like, right? And which one has the best prints? So it's time to compare. Well, before you can get started, you're going to need to find a picture to use. And there is a big difference between a great looking picture and one that works great for lithophanes. High contrast pictures really do work best. If you feel like your picture isn't looking the best after converting it, try editing the contrast and brightness settings. Now, sometimes making a color image into a black and white image, that can help a lot as well. All of these sites have varying degrees of ability when it comes to editing your picture, but making it right before you get started, well, that'll speed up everything and it'll help you get the best print. Now, as far as printing goes, it's pretty much accepted that either white or silver gray filaments, they're going to give you the best looking lithophanes. Now, that doesn't mean you can't try other colors, especially depending on your subject matter. Lithophanes really take advantage of 3D printers' ability to create those high and low spots over a lot of different layers. We know this, but that advantage only really works if your layer height with lithophanes is fairly low. So for a standard 0.4 millimeter nozzle, you're probably going to want to go with a 0.16 millimeter layer height. If you have a super busy picture, you might even want to go lower if that's possible for your printer. Now, this might even be the time to try out that 0.2 millimeter nozzle you keep hearing about. Well, all that being said, here's the most important thing that I think you need to remember when printing a lithophane. It only really works if your print is solid. Now that means your infill needs to be as close to 100% as possible, although you might get away with slightly lower. But the better option for me at least is to increase your shell or those wall perimeters. And this could also save you in print time and filament. And to get solid walls, you can experiment with settings, look at the preview to see how many walls you want to use, or take your maximum thickness of the print and divide by your slicer's wall size. Then round up and maybe even add an extra wall just to be sure. And as far as which way to print, flat, standing, well, we'll get into this more with the actual print tests. I have a feeling that once we get there, we're all going to have an overwhelming preference on this one, but you're going to have to stick around till then. If you need to change the size of the lithophane after you get going, well, it is highly recommended you don't change it in the slicer. Because remember all those high and low spots I mentioned before? Well, your slicer might change the way they interact and look next to each other, and well, that could change your lithophane picture in unexpected ways. Let's get started with one of the more recommended sites around for creating lithophanes, and that's ImageToLithophane by 3DP Rocks. They have 8 different options to print, everything from a flat image to a curve, a cylinder, a dome, even a heart shape. Well, first, when you open the site, it's going to start you on the Model tab. But we need to add a picture, so at the top, click on the Image tab and drop your picture in. It should immediately switch over and show your picture, and then just as quickly, it'll convert it all to a lithophane. And we're done. Well, not quite. Now you can pick an option that you want to print. Be sure to hit the refresh button for every single change you do on this site, and that'll help you to see what it's supposed to look like. I wish it refreshed automatically, but it's not a huge deal when you remember to do it, that is. The 8 options they give you are really good, but for now I'm here just to see how good they make lithophane, so I'm going to stick to the flat option for our testing, but you can experiment with the others later. After importing your image, you can make some adjustments under the Settings tab if you want. Model settings let you adjust nearly everything you would need, and there's the size of your image, how thick to make it, a border. You can even add a base or a curve to your print. Image settings will control how your picture shows on the print, and there's all sorts of settings here as well. There's also repeat and mirror, and those are cool to play around with. These settings are all saved for you automatically unless you change that setting. I recommend keeping the options at default, at least until you're comfortable with how each one affects your print. Now personally, I would love to see model and image settings at the bottom of the page or on the side where our picture actually is, so that we could see our changes in real time instead of going back and forth and hitting the refresh button. And that's really the biggest thing on this site to remember. Constantly hit that refresh button anytime you make a change, no matter what. Otherwise, you could find that you've been changing something based on the wrong image showing. But for a quick, easy, and free site, I think this is really a site that lives up to its name. ImageToLithophane really does rock, you know, because 3DP rocks in the name.
Terrible. Dad joke alert.
LithophaneMaker is next up, and wow, there's a lot of things here to check out. They have 11 different ways you can make lithophanes, and each option has its own dedicated web page. Keeping all the things as similar as possible, though, to the others, I'm going to be using their flat LithophaneMaker. As expected, there's plenty of settings to choose from, and it's nice to see them all right there on the main page, like I mentioned with the previous one. There's even a video at the bottom of the page if you want to know more. Now, if your picture isn't the same size or aspect ratio as your lithophane, you can't just move it around inside the square. You're going to need to use that X shift and Y shift boxes, and those will adjust what you want to actually print. Fortunately, there are up and down arrows, so you won't have to enter your numbers manually. You can also use the rectangle scale to adjust the rectangle in relation to your picture, which is basically, yes, zooming in and zooming out. Now, don't try using 2 fingers on your desktop monitor. That doesn't work.
Please, tell me you didn't.
It would be nice to have pop-up definitions on the settings, but if you scroll down there where that video was, there's some pretty detailed information, and the only thing you may be interested in right here is the width and height of your lithophane, which is exactly what you think it is. The maximum and minimum thickness settings will help you to make a thinner or thicker print, and obviously that's going to affect how much light comes through your lithophane. This is definitely one setting that will benefit from some experimentation. Before you can get your download, you're going to be required to put in an email address. Now, I waited a few days even to see if I would get anything, but nothing came through, so hopefully that's not going to be a problem in the future. Now there's a note that you need to create an account to save your settings, and under the terms of use they also say that by entering your email you're going to agree to get a monthly newsletter. Once you get your download, you're going to find that they also include with your download a settings file for future reference, and that's a great bonus to help you get that perfect Lithophane print. Next up is It's Litho, and they may have the word beta as part of their logo, but it really does feel more like a finished product than any of the other two we've looked at. The home page is a great place to check out all the available options, and those include different shapes you can pick. You can add stands, there's information about printing your lithophane, and there's even a way to make color lithophanes, and I didn't look into that here, but I will eventually. Back at the top, we can get started making our own print. After you get your image loaded in, the first stop is the Edit tab, and there's a lot of things to adjust to get your best print, but I didn't expect the options for grayscaling methods. Now, I recommend changing these settings and watching how they affect your image in real time, and here's something the other Lithophane sites didn't have: that automatic updating in real time of your image when you make a change. Yes!
Dude, this is a no-brainer!
The most basic grayscaling method that works for most pictures is going to be the average method. You have less options, and it just gives you an average of the highs and lows and everything else. For more control, I recommend the luminance method over black and white. And although it's all in gray tones, they give you options for red, green, and blue, and you've probably heard that, RGB. If you've used any type of picture editor like Photoshop and others, you're going to understand this automatically. Basically, it's changing the intensity of the parts of your image that corresponds to those colors. We'll make the adjustments as you see fit. Then it's off to the Model tab. There's 10 different options for your lithophane with all the standards, but they also include a Christmas special section, a pumpkin, and a heart, something for everybody. Weirdly, after choosing the pumpkin, my preview stayed orange on everything I did, but that's not going to affect the actual print, I hope. But to show you some of the other options, I did a quick reset and started over to get back to normal. There's also the standard settings for how thick you want your print to be. You can add a frame, you can add a border, and these options are all simple, really easy to use. Even the advanced toggle lets you change each individual side. Quality options are a new thing here, and this isn't only just the quality of your picture or your print. This option lets you adjust the quality of what you're seeing on your screen, and that helps if your computer or your internet connection is pretty slow. Now, one problem I was having so far with this is I wish I could see what the print would look like before I printed it. All I'm seeing online is the picture, but then I got down to those model options. These options control what you're seeing on screen, and by default it's set to backlighted so that you can see what it's going to look like. When I turned it off, I saw the lithophane as it'll look when I print it. And that means the picture I was seeing was actually what I would see if it was in front of any color light. And now I can make sure I didn't mess something up when playing with those other settings. The image options, well, they're not quite as detailed as some of the others, but honestly, I think that may be a good thing. There's just enough options to make some changes, but not so much that you get bogged down in all of it. I do wish there was at least a contrast adjustment to fix a slightly darker image, but that's okay. Now the zooming may be one thing that wasn't quite as polished as I would like. When I was moving around and zooming, well, it was jumpy due to some online lag, even with my fiber internet. But I did find that using that quality setting, and I turned it down to lousy, it did make it work a lot better. Downloading your lithophane is as easy as expected, but then you see your options. It's pretty cool. They not only give you a chance to download your print, you have the option for the settings you use for reference and more. Well, other than a few minor limitations, It's Litho really makes the process easy and a lot of fun. Printing out all these test prints really took a while, and I didn't expect there to be a whole lot of difference between the different sites and the different prints, and honestly, there's not. But there are some differences, and I think it's worth taking a look at them and see what's going on. As I mentioned before, I used all default settings from all the sites for these prints. And I sliced them all in Bamboo Studio for the Bamboo P1S using Inland PLA Plus filament, white. For all the prints, I found it interesting that ImageToLitho was the only one to give me a warning about processing over 1 million triangles, and I assume that means their print geometry's a good bit more robust than the others, at least with default settings. The first test I did used standard auto settings in the Bamboo Studio. I know I said to print them solid, but I wanted to see how things look. Viewed from a distance, I think all three look pretty good. It's only when we get a little closer we start to have some problems. All three have some very interesting looking patterns that I assume came from the Infill, and there's the reason why you want to print solid. But something that really stood out to me was on the prints from 3DP Rocks and LithophaneMaker. If you look up in there, there's a weird city thing up between the mountains. There's nothing like that on the original picture, and then you'll see that ImageToLitho doesn't have it. Well, that's going to be a conversion issue, and that most definitely means that ImageToLitho did the best. Although, I really don't think any of them look great because of that 15% infill. Now, I also printed a curved litho just to see how that might change anything. Now, these print settings were exactly like the first test, 15% infill and all, but of course they had to print standing. Now, this time they all had some strange issues I wasn't expecting. 3DP Rocks, LithophaneMaker, they both had some odd sky artifacts going on. The only one not to show that weird city in the first test, ImageToLitho, is now showing that weird city shape on our curved standing test. But even with that, I have to give this one to ImageToLitho for clarity on the actual subject, even if just barely. Well, here's where I got to printing the way things should be printed when you're making a lithophane, solid. Again, in Bamboo Studio, I started with standard settings for 0.16 millimeter line height. And then I increased the walls to 7, used 100% rectilinear infill, which is the only one that Bamboo Studio said would give me a solid print. And I also printed both of these at the same time, standing and flat. Now, because of the settings and everything, the standing version's only going to have solid walls, and the one laying flat on the build plate will start with 7 walls, but then it's going to have solid infill. Now, I really had high hopes for all three sites, as well as for both types of prints, since they're going to be solid. And I really couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, yeah, they all look good, and they all work just fine for most of us. But when I put them in front of the light, they were all really different. 3DP Rocks had a really sharp, clean print, but there's something going on in the sky that looks a little off. And what in the world is up with this weird city thing up in the mountains? LithophaneMaker brought it back here and ruined what otherwise might have been a great print. And just to get it out of the way, on the print by ImageToLitho, yes, I had some filament jamming, we had thunderstorms and all. So since that's the only one with banding issue, we're going to ignore that and press on. And so, once again, ImageToLitho wins this round. The pictures are sharp, there's no real artifacts. For the laying down flat, solid version test, I honestly, after it was over, felt like I wasted my time. These solid fill versions are almost identical to the 15% infill test, and they just look bad. And to top it off, LithophaneMaker didn't have the weird city-looking artifact here, while it did have it in the previous flat test. So with all of that, if there's a winner on this test, I guess it's LithophaneMaker. Maybe.
What's your recommendation?
After going through all three websites and testing, if I didn't prove anything else to me, if maybe you, hopefully we've all learned one thing. Never, ever print a lithophane laying down flat. Ugh.
Message received.
But overall, for ease of use, nice user interface, the best looking prints in 3 out of the 4 tests, I think it's pretty obvious that I'm going to have to give it to ImageToLitho. The user interface is simple. It has a lot to use though. It really does feel like a close to finished piece of software you might buy, and I like having all my information right there next to the preview. And those drop down menus, those are a really nice touch. Now, that's not to say that the other two sites aren't worth looking at. They are. There's definitely reasons you might want to go with them. For user interface, I think you'll have to make your own decision since they're just that different. But if you just want to get the best print and the rest of it doesn't matter, you're willing to go with whatever, then Litho is definitely the way to go, at least with standard settings. Before you print your Lithophanes, or if you're having problems, remember these tips. Number 1, calibrate your printer. Next, print vertical. Then don't use supports, but do use a raft or a brim, maybe even glue. If necessary, slow down your print, especially with bed slingers since you're standing up. Solid walls will look way better than 100% infill, or maybe combine them. Lower layer height will equal better prints, but that's going to equal longer prints. Don't use transparent filaments, and don't resize in the slicer if it's possible. And regarding bed slinger printers like the Enders and the Bamboo A1s, try testing the direction of your print. I've seen comments that you might get better results lining up on the Y-axis, front to back, instead of left to right on the X-axis. This seems counterintuitive to me, but it might be worth trying. So it's Litho, that's my personal choice, but you may have a different take. If so, let all of us know in the comments. There's so much to like about all three, it's not really a slam dunk on any of them. And please, if you could, support the channel by subscribing. I look forward to printing and seeing all these Lithophanes out there as we learn, create, and amaze.